to cover is Newcastle against Arsenal, 12:30 early kickoff at St James's Park. Newcastle have been in poor league form after a fantastic start to the season. They are winless in their last 5 league games. However, they did beat Chelsea 2-0 in the EFL Cup midweek, so got a bit of revenge after their weekend result. It's worth noting that they did go for a sort of stronger 11, whereas Chelsea opted for a bit more rotation. Arsenal also won midweek 3-0 to Preston, and they'll be looking to sort of bounce back to winning ways in the Premier League, having been pegged back twice against Liverpool to draw 2 each. And before that, they lost 2-0 to Bournemouth, obviously, with Saliba getting sent off. So they'll be looking for a bit of a bounce back. In terms of the injury report, obviously, Saliba will now be able to feature for this one. He served his 1-game suspension against Liverpool. His centre-back partner, however, Gabriel, is ruled out. So a bit of an uncertainty in that respect, but I would imagine it's Kirill who deputises alongside him, as he did against Preston. Calafiori remains out, as does Odegaard. So we can expect to see sort of Saka, Havertz, Trossard, and Declan Rice reintroduced to the lineup after being rested midweek. For Newcastle, Anthony Gordon shook off doubts of an injury to feature against Chelsea, so he should be in line to start. Bruno Guimaraes was also afforded a rest in that game, so should be good to go as well. Not too much news in terms of the injury report for Eddie Howe to contend with, so we can expect a sort of similar lineup we've seen so far this season. Don't think Gab has been ruled out. He nearly made this one for something. From what I've seen, I think it's very unlikely he starts. As I say with Arteta, he's usually quite vague with his lineup. So, I would say maybe he isn't 100% ruled out of this game. If he does start, sort of, we'll have to make adjustments to how we sort of approach the game. But for now, I've assumed he is out. One of the selections that I will cover is in regards to that, so we can sort of consider what to do in that scenario. But I'll touch back on that later. So thank you for bringing that one up. But it is an early kickoff, 12:30, and I do think it's a bit of a banana skin fixture. We have to be a bit wary with how we sort of approach this. When you consider how teams have approached games so far, we would say they're both sort of content with sitting back. They're both content off the ball, which means I think the overall play is quite game state dependent. I think obviously Arsenal will be the ones pressing for the win, and Newcastle, I don't think a draw would be a bad result for them, but given their poor form and the fact that they're at home, I think they'll be sort of very front-footed in their approach. So I think whoever gets the first goal of the game, it can really dictate how the game is played out later on. So when you have those kind of games, they're a bit harder to approach. So we do have to be wary. I think we can gain a lot of valuable information looking into the last head-to-head between these two. It was quite a feisty affair. We saw a lot of first-half cards, sort of a lot of tension being built up, especially through sort of tough challenges from Havertz. So I think duels actually are the way to go for this one. They're the sort of angle in for me. And starting off, the sort of price that catches my eye the most is Joe Linton to commit 2 or more fouls, which is priced at 1.66 with Sky, their top price. But you can boost that by doubling it with one of the Arsenal players to draw a foul. So I've gone for Saka to draw a foul, which boosts the odds to 1.83, which I think looks a really, really nice price. When you consider how Joe Linton plays, he's obviously quite physical in his approach, and whenever you get games like this where it's a big game at home, you sort of see him play with a bit more intensity in midfield. I think we can draw a lot of parallels between this game and the Man City game earlier this season, which was also an early kickoff. So in that game, Joe Linton committed 3 fouls, which was his most for the season, other than Spurs. He was also carded, got in a lot of duels, really, really put himself about. And yeah, as I say, 12:30 kickoff at home to a big club. So quite similar to this game against Arsenal. Joe Linton has made a foul in every game so far this season. If we look into the sort of more relevant fixtures, he's got 5 fouls, yellow carded against Spurs at home, 3 fouls, yellow carded against City at home, and then 2 fouls against Chelsea in the EFL Cup. So in those sort of, as I mentioned, the home games against bigger clubs, against top 6 clubs where Newcastle are perhaps the underdogs, we do see him play with that bit more aggression, potentially sort of driven on by the home crowd. So really like his sort of foul prices, 1.66. Slightly too short for a single, but can easily back it with a sort of correlated stat to boost the odds. Going with a similar angle, Bruno Guimaraes has also seen a pretty sizable uptick in fouls when playing at home against a big club. Similarly, if you look against his game against Spurs, 3 fouls, yellow carded, and against City, 3 fouls, yellow carded. So he's another player to target because Newcastle will be intense in their press. They'll be front-footed in their approach, at least to start the game, I would imagine. And we saw Bruno Guimaraes against City earlier this season made a foul after about 2 minutes. So he's sort of a more emotional player, will be quite fired up, will be ready for this game, and therefore I see him as a good player to target in addition to Joe Linton. He's actually priced at 2.0 to commit 2 fouls with Paddy Power, who are best price. Sky Bet are not too far behind, they're at 1.91. So I think both of those prices look really, really nice on the surface. Also, considering that sort of both players have been carded, all were carded against City, I do think it's a very, very similar game. So I'm looking at those two to get carded again. In the head-to-head last game between these two, or last season between these two, Bruno Guimaraes made 2 fouls and was carded. Joe Linton did manage to escape a card, but he did make 2 fouls. So again, really like those two, and I think there is long shot potential with the double. So if you double 2 fouls each for Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes, that comes out at 3.4 with Sky, which I think is really nice. And the card double comes out to 8-1 with Sky also. So I think there is a long shot potential for those two. Data looks fantastic. I think in terms of their approach, I think they'll be really, really aggressive and front-footed in this game. I think the only concern would be it's an early kickoff, but we did see against City, even despite that they were very, very sort of front-footed, they were eager to press and sort of willing to draw in midfield. That the sort of timing of the game didn't really affect how they played. Again, I think it's a difficult game to predict, but if we sort of look at how Newcastle started the game at City, they were sort of, it was a very chaotic start. It was Newcastle sort of trying to take advantage of the home crowd before Man City can fully settle. They were quite intent on their press to start off with before sort of settling down a bit into more of a low block. But it was the first 10 minutes that were really chaotic. And in that 10 minutes, we saw quite a lot of duels. I think we saw 1 City free kick and 1 City corner. So I think that is a sort of alternative angle for this one. If we look at the sort of first 10-minute stats, I've decided to go sort of quite safe for now and go with a double of over 0.5 corners for both teams and over 1.5 free kicks for both teams in the first 10 minutes. And that comes out at 2.04, which I do think is a really nice price actually when we consider how sort of feisty the affair was between these two sides last season. I think sort of stats in the first half, stats in the first minute, the odds are a lot more sort of backable than if you look at the whole game. And I do think there is certainly ladder potential there. If you were to go for Arsenal to receive a corner in the first 10 minutes, that would be 2.37. And I think odds against for that sort of selection is a pretty nice price. To go back to Saliba, one of the sort of main things I like about Saliba this season is obviously the fact that he's been a bit more aggressive in his centre-back partnership with Gabriel. And that's led to an uptick in tackles, which sort of books have been quite slow to adjust to. So we've seen him make at least 2 tackles in 8 out of 12 games so far this season in all competitions. But it's worth noting that those came in each of the first 8 games of the season. So he's actually blanked in the last 4 straight games. And I think that is something to look into a bit. So he's priced at 1.83 for 2 tackles, which on the surface, given that's landed in 8 out of 12 games, looks a good value selection. But when we interrogate the data a bit more, we see in the last 4 games it's obviously failed to land. One of those being against Bournemouth, where he was sent off after 30 minutes already on 1 tackle. So I think it's fair to us to ignore that game for now. So if we focus on the 3 games where he blanked, that's against Preston away, Shakhtar at home, and Southampton at home. 3 games where Arsenal were totally dominant, where they didn't really allow their opposition to sort of progress very much, and therefore Saliba was sort of not very involved on the defensive front. Against Preston, for example, you can see Arsenal had 74% possession, and Saliba actually was in 0 ground duels, so wouldn't even be close to this. Against Newcastle, it's a completely different game. I think it'll be a lot more evenly contested. The market is sort of favouring a more even game, and therefore, by extension, I think Saliba will be in a lot more duels, and it'll be sort of more similar to his opening fixtures of the season. He's averaging 2.5 tackles per game in all competitions, which is a massive uptick from last season, and 1.83 is a nice price based on that. The next thing to actually consider is who he plays alongside with. So, obviously, assuming Gabriel is out, there's quite a lot of uncertainty in regards to how he plays alongside Kyrgios. Preston was not a good game to sort of look into that. It's sort of uncertain who will be the more aggressive in the partnership. But I'd actually, if Kyrgios was to start, I'd probably lean towards Kyrgios being the more aggressive player, just because he has sort of experience at fullback, whereas Saliba doesn't. He just plays as a centre back. However, if Gabriel is to start, Saliba will be the more aggressive player against the likes of Isak, Anthony Gordon, so he draws a good matchup in that sense. And therefore, I really like his tackle prices again. So I think it's one to keep an eye on for lineups. But if Kyrgios is to start, probably an avoid. Just sort of keep an eye on who is the more aggressive in the partnership to see how to approach that bet going forward. But if Gabriel starts, I think it looks a pretty solid bet. For now, though, that's just a lean. Wouldn't imagine it drops in price. I think for these kind of games where it's 2 big teams, you don't get too many significant price movements. So happy to just sort of wait for lineups on that one before taking. That's all for the Arsenal-Newcastle early kickoff. Quite a few angles for that one, despite it being quite a tough fixture to navigate. Second